Our next presenter is Karen.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hi.
Karen's presentation is titled Compliance, Masking on Demand. She writes, society's entrenched requirement for children to comply to socially constructed, that is completely invented norms, is a catalyst for our young people to begin to mask. This is damaging to anybody's self-esteem, self-identity, self-worth, etc. And it essentially creates an increasing sense of isolation and hinders the person from reaching their full potential. For our children and young people, this leaves them vulnerable to grooming and manipulation by others who seek to exploit them. They need to know how to say no when they need to. And understanding that celebrating each child for who they are rather than forcing conformity on them creates a foundation for reaching their full potential. And one second, I lost it. 1 second. And healthy life outcomes. Karen is a late diagnosed autistic and ADHD woman, radio presenter, mother, and professional, seeking to raise acceptance and understanding of neurodivergent conditions like autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, OCD, bipolar disorder, etc., and the strengths that they offer society as a whole. Karen was the inaugural speaker on 21st April for the Lunch and Learn events run by ADD Vans and University of, I again lost it. University of Hertfordshire to support Neurodiversity Celebration Week 2022. Her passion is championing her neuro-minority community and its pride, strengths, and vision. Also, supporting individuals, families, and organizations towards greater understanding of the opportunities that her neuro community create for everyone and themselves. The ripples she makes are aimed at addressing the often unconscious bias that can exist in society and reduce the barriers that her neuro-minority communities continue to face in areas such as employment, education, health, housing, etc. She does this to make the world a better place. Her paid work supplements the pro bono low-fee participation she does with various organizations and gives her the freedom to participate where she feels the most impact can be made to create the shifts needed. For the impact of her fellow autistic, Greta Thunberg, on climate issues proved. Go on, Karen.
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to share my screen. So let me just do that. So can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Lovely. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining me today and to Truhap for giving me the opportunity to connect with you. I'm going to be talking about the link between masking and society's unhealthy appetite for compliance and conformity, and how this creates vulnerability for my autistic community. So to tell you a little about myself, I'm Karen HANNAN, and I'm driven by this mission, which is to do what I can to help other neurodiverse and neurodivergent people like me at whatever stage of their lives to feel more able than I used to be their true selves and to reach their full potential and achieve healthy life outcomes and relationships. And what really fuels my passion is a specific reason for being with you today, and that is to do whatever I can to address the possible reasons for the stark statistics that show that autistic people are more likely to die by suicide than any other group. And I do this by using three things that appear to be helping me to succeed in my mission. And those are, firstly, the power of my authentic and true identity and voice, which is something I really had to rediscover, having had another identity and voice imposed on me at a very young age by society's demand for conformity that it broadcasts to all of us as soon as we enter the world. And I'm not going to lie, having found my voice and in my quest to continue to rediscover the real me buried all those decades ago, and given that I am now my own boss, well, let's just say silence is no longer an option. Secondly, I use my intellect, which was long undermined by the intense lack of confidence that I've lived with all my life. Again, as a result of the messages around me then, and that I then began to adopt as my own inner rhetoric, that the only way that society would accept and recognise my intellect would be if I could easily put my thinking onto paper as well as I can when I'm speaking. And this is incredibly difficult and overwhelming for me to do. And thirdly, I use my ability to build empathic and positive relationships with those that I come into contact with. And these are skills that I've developed and honed after years of struggling to make healthy connections with others and learning to manage the high levels of emotional empathy I experience that can overwhelm me if I don't pay attention to this. I am really lucky and very grateful that all three of these qualities of mine seem to interact effectively to form a strong and innate way for me to help others in my neuro community and those around us to feel more able and comfortable to consider a different way of thinking, and so eventually behave and believe differently. And this in turn appears to result in more positive outcomes for individuals, organisations, communities, and thankfully for society as a whole. I mentioned my lost and rediscovered authentic voice, and this really resonates with my subject today, because it is the voice that was silenced in childhood by the messages I received from society and then internalised and abided by. That conformity is to be prized and valued, and difference is to be trained out of someone, otherwise they are and will continue to be shunned by those around them and face barriers to success because society will not be able to accept them as they are. Similarly, while I'm very verbally intelligent and intellectually able and curious, I find it very hard to get my thinking onto paper and organised. And this was unfortunately, the narrow assessment criteria during my educational years, meaning that it was impossible for me in that way to reach my own full potential. And yet I am incredibly hopeful about the progress that my neurodiverse and divergent communities are making that help society to understand and accept what sincere and authentic diversity, equality and inclusion must be, so that everyone can benefit from the strength this brings to society as a whole and the positive impact this will have on reducing the vulnerability of the autistic community to suicide. And I hope this may help other neurodivergent people like me to feel more confident about finding ways to discover or rediscover their own authenticity, their own positive self-esteem, self-belief, self-worth and sense of self, in the same way I've been lucky to be able to do through a combination of therapy, research, self-reflection and discovery, and increasing self-advocacy and connecting with my very vibrant and increasingly proud neuro community. And ultimately, this led to the kindness that I was able to show myself following my later life diagnoses of autism and ADHD, and helped me to leave behind the self-blame, the self-stigma and the hopelessness and poor sense of self that I'd endured for so long, because I and others were measuring me according to my weaknesses and ignoring the fact that I'd spent my life navigating and enduring environments that were in fact setting me up to fail. It is difficult for people like me when the environment means we exist in a permanent state of survival and are denied the opportunity to thrive that most people in the same environment have. And so while having been liberated by diagnosis and an increasing understanding of who I am in all my quirky, funny, loyal, empathic, creative, bright, nurturing and inventive glory, and having learned to let go of the stigma of the negative implicit and internalized stigma I've lived with and which can still catch me out, I want to think with you about the importance of valuing each individual autistic person for who they are and encouraging, and if necessary, supporting them to play to their specific strengths, and eschew the nonsensical idea that conformity is a healthy ideal for anyone. So to help others find the courage to be their true and authentic selves who may previously perhaps have been hindered in this because they've worried about how others around them may respond, I try to adopt the mantra that someone once said, and that is to be so completely yourself that everyone else feels safe to be themselves too. Personally, I've found the response to living life this way tends to be overwhelmingly positive. And at those times when perhaps it's not, that even that provides good opportunities for helping others to perhaps shift their negative and ill-informed assumptions and expectations to more positive understanding and healthy aspirations. And where this is not possible, I can choose to take what next steps I need to make life work for me and move on. For those of you who perhaps like conventional ways of measuring others and their expertise, experience and aptitude, I will say that while I don't have an ology, I do have over 50 years experience of studying and refining my understanding, reflections and communications in society as a whole and within my neurodivergent community, and using these qualities to find ways to connect with and positively influence those around me who are themselves feeling unseen, unheard, and who see themselves only in negative ways, to feel more empowered and less self-critical and more hopeful, and find ways to reach their full potential and learn to feel more positive about themselves, and help those around me who are stuck in outdated and damaging thinking and behaviour to connect with my neurodivergent community and begin to take responsibility and then make the changes necessary to reduce the disadvantage that they have imposed on my neurodivergent community by fixating on frankly invented ways of being and behaving that have actively undermined individuals within my community and by extension society as a whole. People are my dopamine, and for me every conversation matters. And I've realised that there is huge power for change in open communication rooted in finely balanced assertion, connection, clarity, respect and kindness, and alongside that a healthy and well-timed playfulness. So while I haven't learned what I know and believe and achieve from a book, as the racing driver Brian Redman said, being an expert is more than understanding how a system is supposed to work. Expertise is gained by investigating why a system doesn't work. And I believe that society as a whole needs to shift rapidly away from conformity as its socially constructed and outdated ideal, often rooted in maintaining a sense of privilege and control for some socially constructed elite over those they deem to be less than, or because they fear the implications of being truly and authentically inclusive and egalitarian in their approach. And this shift is necessary to reduce and ultimately eradicate the marginalisation of the autistic community that results from this demand for unhealthy compliance and denial of self, which hugely undermines an autistic person's healthy development. Because that approach says to an autistic child that who they really are is not good enough, and that in order for the world around them to accept them, they must mould themselves into a version that society would prefer to experience. And in order to achieve this perverse societal acceptance, that the autistic child must crush the soul of the person they could become, and that would help them to be healthy, happy and whole. And if we consider this, then we can understand why imposing compliance and conformity as the basis for connecting with others and being accepted results in vastly increased vulnerability to grooming and manipulation by others who frankly hunt for vulnerable, marginalised prey by enticing them with unhealthy and coercive illusions of acceptance and belonging that in many ways reflect the narcissistic and controlling messages that were ingrained in me and those like me by society in our developmental years of its fixation on conformity and compliance. I've certainly experienced this myself, as have many close to me. And what I know is that this is a recipe for cultivating vulnerable children and adults to become fruit that is ripe for the picking by those in society who prey on the vulnerable for their own ends. And that simply isn't good enough, and it needs to change fast. If we are really And that simply isn't good enough, and it needs to change fast. If we're really sincere in wanting to cultivate children of any kind of difference, including our autistic children, to develop the healthy self-image and self-esteem and sense of self that will help them to seek and recognize that connections that are healthy for them, and have the ability to say no when they need to those around them who may seek to manipulate them. And we need to take steps to firstly actively teach our children to say no effectively. And secondly, avoid any bias towards requiring compliance from our children, whether this is at home, in school, or the greater world. We need to make adjustments that address a still strong fixation on narrow ways of moulding children that may work successfully for many children and young people, but which marginalise and damage a minority who've had to navigate it in survival mode, and therefore reduces their ability to say no and reach their full potential, and increases the likelihood of poor life outcomes. I hope that I have really helped you to think about the societal narcissism gaslighting that lies in its demand for conformity and how it actively undermines positive development in our autistic children, sets them up to experience high degrees of minority stress and barriers to success in life, and creates and maintains their vulnerability to those who seek to manipulate others, promotes poor life outcomes, and restricts the autistic person's potential. And why encouraging our children to express their authenticity and actively develop ways to say no when they need to, and to listen to them when they do this, protects them better from manipulation by predatory others, promotes more success for them in reaching their potential and positive life outcomes, and reduces the minority stress that otherwise forms much of their reality, and allows them to express who they are when they need to and in ways that work for them and those around them, and helps them to say no and advocate well for themselves. Ultimately, this will mean that we will all be able to benefit from the strength and contribution that my autistic community has to offer, from its many positive qualities such as loyalty, honesty, determination, a strong sense of justice. We're very observant and funny, creative thinking and problem solving, attention to detail, amazing memory, hyper-focus, an ability to switch from one thing to another when the environment works for us, the ability to notice connections and common themes that others may not, our fearlessness and emotional intelligence, our quick wit, our caring, our empathy, our articulation, our artistic and innovative thinking. Impressive, isn't it? Hope you're watching, Greta, by the way. And I'd like to thank you again so much for listening to me today. And for those of you who might be interested in discussing ways that we can work together, my contact details are on the screen, so please do get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen.